everyone, and welcome to my PowerPoint presentation for this week. The topic of the PowerPoint presentation is going to be on an agency that we feel needs some change and kind of identifying those changes and talking about how, in our study of public administration, we can identify some of the theorists and their theories and how to possibly go about these changes. So the topic of my PowerPoint presentation this week is on the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA as it's known. And so the Environmental Protection Agency has come under a lot of fire recently. Currently, the top, appointed official is under scrutiny for overspending and basically, spending in areas that oversight should have caught, which is a red flag, as well as some of his, personal relationships have been a little questionable. And so the president right now, President Trump, really has been supporting the EPA's top official. But we're going to talk a little bit about how, politics and public administration kind of have, both been going a little awry in the Environmental Protection Agency. And politics are perhaps playing a little too much of a part in the EPA. There's been some corruption scandals in addition to the one that I had just mentioned. And so we'll talk about how, the EPA is under a bit of, a firestorm from the public as far as its image is concerned. So how do we create faith in the EPA's bureaucracy again? And to go about doing that might be a little bit difficult. So let's talk about maybe some of the areas where we can, try to find some solutions. So in creating faith back in the bureaucracy again, let's talk a little bit about, bureaucracy, the importance of bureaucracy, or whether or not, certain organizations that are built upon the concepts of a bureaucracy are actually, doing its job. And maybe there's some areas where we can, change and areas we can keep. So basically some changes that needed to be happening or need to happen in the EPA right now is definitely to clean up the scandals that are going on in its leadership. As I had just mentioned, there has been a current scandal right now with the top appointed official. In recent years, there was, another official who actually, was caught destroying documents, emails, and files that would have, basically painted President Clinton or former President Clinton's administration in a bad light. So what exactly is going on with these, top appointed officials? What elements of the bureaucracy are set up that let some of this corruption go on? So, bureaucracy is not necessarily bad. There's definitely, the institution of the bureaucracy could be good. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the reinforcement of some of these, core bureaucratic elements and what we can keep and what we can change. So in light of kind of going into what we should keep, what we should change, and kind of reinforcing the EPA's mission and goals, we definitely need to talk about reinstating the public's trust in the EPA. So the EPA was established, almost 50 years ago now. It was created under the Nixon administration. President Nixon actually was the one that helped to create this agency. And under his presidency, he basically identified the need from the public and from this, basically widespread outcry of what was going on in the environment. There was a ton of pollution, including air pollution, water pollution. There was pollution coming from cars, going into the ozone layer and helping, to create this hole in the ozone layer that you've probably heard about. We have, sewage running off into our fresh waters, hazardous waste, oil and gas companies not, disposing of their, byproducts in a good way. And so there's been a lot of, basically, sicknesses, diseases that have been contributed, the sources to these pollution sources. And so these private companies, these private businesses, manufacturing, and big businesses of industry and fossil fuels were found to be some of the sources of these. So because people were getting sick, the EPA was created to essentially protect, the public health, protect the environmental safety, of the public, as well as the environment just in general in nature. And so the bureaucracy was set up to do that. There was agencies that were set up, or I should say departments within this agency that were set up to specifically deal with water. And so when the Clean Water Act was created, they all set up to, enforce these regulatory sanctions for companies and, the public to make sure that we had clean water. Then Clean Air Act, when that was passed as well, sanctions were set up, and Congress had given the EPA power in order to regulate these sanctions. So the EPA is a regulatory agency, given power by Congress to enforce these laws and these regulations. So the bureaucracy itself that was created has a lot of power to it. And as we'll talk about, and as Weber, illustrates in some of his characteristics of a bureaucracy, this hierarchy that was created and these divisions of labor of the different departments, it basically gives the EPA a lot of, power over these different, not only these different like private companies and industries to, regulate and enforce these sanctions, but just within itself as a bureaucracy. It's a very powerful bureaucracy. So when we hear about these, problems of corruption, some of this power is kind of going to some of these people's heads. And is in the case of bureaucracy, it is intrinsically, in a way imperfect. And so it calls into question, the efficiency of the whole organization. And so three themes that need to be dealt with is, the institution of the bureaucracy itself. How do we go about making it, better again? Because we can't change the whole thing, but, we need to talk about, Weber's theory of bureaucracy. And another theme is the commitment to the mission and goals need to be revisited. And in light of that, how do we, create awareness and support for the EPA again? Because the mission and goals, were on point to protect the human, protect the public health, protect the environment. These are good things to do. So how do we get back on track? And then the third thing is, the efficiency of it. So how do we deal with making the EPA more efficient again and less subjected to corruption and such? So the theory of bureaucracy and efficiency, we cannot talk about bureaucracy or efficiency without obviously mentioning Weber and then mentioning Frederick Taylor. So these theories of, the institution of bureaucracy and of efficiency, Weber's theory of bureaucracy lends itself to the 6 characteristics of bureaucracy. So for the EPA, the first and foremost is the divisions of labor, the hierarchy of the organization, and these existence of rules and regulations. So that kind of the first 3 characteristics of bureaucracy basically describes the EPA's way of handling the power that was given to them. So when they were set up, like I mentioned, there's all these different departments: water, air, hazardous waste and such, but they're very separated from each other. So they do have, this hierarchy between the departments that is very separated. So they issues get escalated to the supervisor, but then when the issue needs to go escalated even further, it goes up and up and up to a point where the higher officials, have a lot of power, and these other departments don't really talk to each other as much. So there's some instances where, one company gets away with something in one division, but not in the other, and vice versa. So there's a bit of inconsistency in the nature of this bureaucracy. And again, these existence of these rules and regulations, well, the EPA's enforcement of these laws is paramount to its existence. But in this, nature of the bureaucracy, the actual mission and the goals are being kind of forgotten. And it's important to know that these rules and regulations need to be stressed, but not over, the importance of also the ethics of being true to the job, not having maybe any inside, knowledge of something going on, and then having, like a conflict of interest with other, private organizations. And so it's very important that we make sure that we keep these officials, under a set of checks and balances as well. And that's with government in itself. Government needs to run at its utmost efficiency only when these different branches, when we talk about the difference between politics and public administration, that dichotomy, we really need to make sure these set of checks and balances and the distribution of power is really, only obtained when it's somehow put in check by somebody else too, or these different, branches of government somehow have a way to, keep some oversight in the process of having their own bureaucracies amongst all these different organizations. So Weber's theory of bureaucracy is inherently, subjecting the EPA to, essentially, we talk about the characteristics of bureaucracy, but we need to understand that not necessarily bureaucracy is bad, and that's not necessarily the point of this here as well. It's just saying what can we keep and what can we change when an institution is already set up, such as the EPA, in which it's dependent upon a bureaucracy. So let's go through a little bit more about that. So what elements can we keep and what can we change? So we definitely need to keep the skilled divisions of labor. We definitely need to keep the impartiality of, who we hire. It doesn't matter race, creed, anything, but just based upon a skill set of knowledge of the environmental rules, law, biology, and natural sciences. But what we do need to change is that we need to make sure that these top officials who are, sometimes appointed by the president himself are able to have an unbiased opinion and not have any outside sources that are in the private sector that would call their ethics into question. And in order to do that, and in order to understand what's kind of going on behind the scenes, we need to increase the oversight of these departments, especially at the top level. And so these inefficiencies, and so, when we touch on Frederick Taylor and his efficiency, just very quickly, for scientific management and making sure that areas are efficient, and, kind of talking about the skilled divisions of labor, so to speak, the efficiencies of a bureaucracy can be obtained when you really do make sure that there's good communication between the different departments. And so making sure that, the structure of the hierarchy and the structure of, how the managers interact with everybody else, you need to make sure that everyone is all on the same page about everything. And so that's one element of, this bureaucracy, and, making it more efficient really needs to hold true. So the American public really can believe in this bureaucracy of the EPA and not just feel like it's very inefficient, it's corrupt, and, not doing what it was intended to do. So that was just a very quick overview of the EPA, kind of essentially some of the changes that need to go on. And obviously we touched on, the bureaucracy of the EPA in general, whether or not the bureaucracy is good, the theory of Weber with the theory of bureaucracy, and then touching on a little bit about efficiency and how to make the EPA more efficient. So I hope you enjoyed the PowerPoint presentation and look forward to talking to you later. Bye-bye.